Welcome back to the Many Toys of, the show in which we go over the action figure history of various Transformers characters. And this time around, it's time to talk about potentially the most famous Transformer to not come from G1. It is time for the Many Toys of Bulkhead. Bulkhead has had more requests than any other character in the history of the Many Toys of. So, before we begin, a big thank you to Steve Placeholder 6522, Karma the Toaster, J. Jonah Jameson 1164, Davimus TF, Hugh, Crunchy Wafers, Freddy Fazboy 399, The Collector H4Z, Guh 1916, Jendrun Purnama, Hulk Hoagie Breadmaster, Mechanics, That One Kiwi, Might YT, Arthur V. Gupta 3310, Noah Grant MO4ZI, Best Dongle Weenus 7254, Weaponized Toy Car, Dr. Ramilo 84, Siren V2T, Resposeful Crane 4269, The Bulbasaur Guy 5563, The Real Meditoon Glove, Daniel Haddock 644, The Nerd Smash, Egg Mayo Sandwich 6942, and an especially big thank you to Totally Not Xfinity, who has been going to bat for Bulkhead for months now. Thank all of you so much for recommending Bulkhead and making him officially the most wanted character in the history of the Many Toys of. Bulkhead has taken a path in Transformers that almost no other character has. As I said before, he is not an 80s boy. And yet, his original incarnation also has very little bearing on the Bulkhead we know today. First appearing in Transformers Energon, this Bulkhead, visually, is supposed to be like Springer. However, in personality, he's a lot more similar to Cup, an often foolish old man who's prone to telling stories and has more than a bit of boomer humor wrapped into him, but at the same time is a veteran. Even though he has a hard time remembering where he put his keys in the morning, he still knows how to bust some Decepticon heads. Already you can start to see some similarities to the Bulkhead that would become more famous. The green color scheme, the larger frame, the idea that he's actually a good bit smarter than you would think. But in truth, Bulkhead was just a pretty good name given to a somewhat generic character.
Yeah, I think it's time for me to teach him a lesson they won't forget. Bombs away!
Even still, his original toy in 2004 is really fun. Keep in mind what I said, Bulkhead is a pretty generic character, and yet you can see that the designers seem to just put everything in the kitchen sink onto Bulkhead. Okay, he's a helicopter. Pretty solid looking helicopter at that. Well, what if the helicopter had a gun pack? Alright, I'm digging it. Now what if he transforms and he's an ultra class transformer? Ooh, okay, big boy, I'm liking where this is going. Now what if the gun pack came back and now it was like Doc Ock with different arms and weapons hanging off his back? Okay, a little bit of an odd way to take this. Even better, what if the gun pack now has legs and can walk around like an AT-AT? Okay, I think we've lost the plot, but at the very least, this is a fun toy. Bulkhead is massive. He is filled with ratchet joints, he has great paint, and as I said, he looks like a grizzled Springer. Springer's already a pretty good look. Giving him 5 o'clock shadow through that orange faceplate is just helping make the color scheme more interesting. The helicopter mode is so much fun. The transformation's a good one. And at the end of the day, even the gun pack at least gives you options. More stuff to do in robot mode, more stuff to do in vehicle mode, and unlike most accessories, at least it has its own playability. If you want, it can just be Bulkhead's friend. This Bulkhead might not have much to do with any Bulkhead to come after, but in his own right, in a vacuum, this is a really fun toy, and a great example as to how creative Energon could be. That same year in Takara Tomy markets, you'd be able to get the Super Link Sprung. Yeah, in Japan, they just outright called this guy Springer. And on top of that, his colors are so much more dashing. I love this bolder green and orange. The name Bulkhead would lay low for a number of years, until eventually it was used for a new character in Transformers Animated. And for anyone who doesn't know, almost every character design in Animated is owed in some small part to Bulkhead. In the original treatment of the show, Energon Bulkhead's personality was going to stay intact, that of an older veteran who was often the point of humor. Hotshot's pranks would get under his skin and he'd have a hard time keeping up with the younger bots. As time went on, the name stayed the same, but Bulkhead would be changed dramatically, until eventually Derek J. Wyatt, the art director of the show, used Bulkhead as a way to flesh out the new art style of Animated. He took 3 characters, Optimus Prime, Prowl, and Bulkhead. Optimus Prime was supposed to be a more generic model. This is what a more true to G1 looking character could appear as in Animated. Prowl was supposed to be a radical reinvention that was still familiar, so even though he was a new bot and a new personality, he still had some of the original Prowl's identity and aesthetics intact, specifically the forehead chevron and the connection to the police. Bulkhead was supposed to push the art style to its limits, goofier, louder, bolder than any Transformer to come before, and it was beautiful. This Bulkhead would be the one to make the name mean something, and make the character a star. In Transformers Animated, Bulkhead is many things. A gentle giant? Yes, but not an overly polite or cuddly one. Keep in mind, he is still a simple bot with simple pleasures. He loves to transform his back kibble into a chair so that he can drink oil and watch TV. Mixmaster and Scrapper are his drinking buddies. Bulkhead is treated as being more blue-collar than the other Autobots, including coming from an Energon farm. When he first meets Bumblebee in Auto Boot Camp, he speaks with a notable southern drawl, which he tries to hide as he gets a little bit older and winds up on a space bridge crew.
All people want me to do is break stuff. I got a sensitive side too, you know. I don't think those kids like me anyway.
I'll cut off your nutsack and nail it to my door!
Alongside that, we find out in the Season 2 finale, Bulkhead is Cybertron's foremost expert on space bridge repair. Not necessarily space bridge engineering, but the actual creation and maintaining of the technology. A lot of people shove their nose at this and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. But I'd argue it does. Bulkhead isn't someone who can create a new model, he's just the best at maintaining the current models of space bridges. So why wouldn't he be on a space bridge team? Alongside that, a lot of people tend to act like the art crew was supposed to be some ragtag bunch of misfits. But when you really think about it, Ultra Magnus put Optimus Prime, Ratchet, and the corpse of Omega Supreme all in one spot. His failed protege, a veteran who had a lot of dirt on him, and his ultimate weapon. Clearly, Ultra Magnus was giving some of the better members in the Space Bridge Brigade all to the same ship. So why wouldn't he give Bulkhead to Optimus Prime? Bumblebee is the odd one out in that regard, and Prowl too, but let's be fair, Prowl was not supposed to be on that ship. Bulkhead, despite his brilliance, never has an ego about him. He is always the same friendly bot, though he can have a temper and does not like being spoken down to. In many ways, I'd argue that Animated Bulkhead is still the most complex version of the character to date. A bot who knows what he's good at, but also fully understands his own limitations, but never lets that stop him from trying to help the people he cares about. He is the biggest and the strongest, but the biggest and the strongest Autobot still doesn't have much on the Decepticons. But fear never stops Bulkhead. He is willing to get up and take another pounding if it means that he can help out his friends just a little bit longer. The first version of Animated Bulkhead you'd be able to get in toy form came out in 2008, the Voyager class version of the guy. And I have to say, this thing is gorgeous. It looks like he stepped right off the screen. The color is just perfect, the vehicle mode is so smooth, and the transformation has so much intuitive engineering to it. Even in robot mode, you have a ton of good gimmicks, including an automorph in the transformation, and even though he's shorter for a Voyager, he's still pretty well scaled to the other Autobots, and he's definitely helping a lot more than Lugnut is in terms of scaling. This Bulkhead might not be the best version of him in toy form, but for Voyager scale, specifically first wave of animated, it really did show what the line was going to accomplish by the end of its run. Whereas some of the Wave 1 figures, like Megatron and Bumblebee, were good but had some issues, I'd argue that Bulkhead was already a great representation of the line, what its engineering could provide, and ultimately, how it would become one of the most beloved toy lines in all of Transformers history. So here was the odd thing. You know how I said that the Voyager Bulkhead was solid but just had some problems, most of it coming from scaling? What if I told you that at the same exact time you could get the Voyager Bulkhead, you could also get the Leader Bulkhead? Now, Leader Bulkhead is amazing, and it is my favorite version of Bulkhead ever in toy form, but he's also a good bit less show accurate. For one thing, he has a buzzsaw in his hand, missiles on his arms. The Autobots tended to not use guns or firearms or explosives in the show, and yet here Bulkhead is ready to go to war. Hell, in vehicle mode, he straight up has a tank turret on top of the SWAT van. And yet in robot mode, this is just Bulkhead, isn't it? You push the button on his chest and you can get him to say, "Whoa!" or "You can do it, buddy! Sorry, my bad!" He has so much personality. Even when the electronics burn out, it still just looks like Bulkhead. The head sculpt is pitch perfect. The proportions are a lot closer to the show than even the Voyager was. The transformation's so much more clever. If you could take the buzzsaw and the missiles off, this would be the most accurate Bulkhead. And even with those things, I can kind of convince myself that they're not actually missiles or guns. Maybe it's just fire extinguishers and foam missiles. Those things exist, don't they? And even better, he comes with the Headmaster. You can get one of the best human villains from the entire show, and he can go on top of Bulkhead's body. This is such a beautiful love letter to not just the character, but the show itself. And nowadays, it very well might be the best leader to come out of animated. A lot smoother than Megatron, not quite as gimmick heavy as Ultra Magnus, just a great little slice of Derek J. Wyatt goodness. Going from the biggest Bulkhead to the smallest Bulkhead, you could get the Activator. This one-step changer is still fully articulated and makes for a great little Bulkhead. Admittedly, it's not as accurate as the other versions, but come on man, he's like 3 inches tall. There was the Bumper Battler Bulkhead. This was just a gimmick toy where he could pop up as soon as you hit the front bumper of the SWAT van. To bring a colossal year to a close, you could have gone the Transformers Animated Game Collection, in which you would have had a tiny PVC figure of Bulkhead. Isn't he just adorable? Due to the popularity of Transformers Animated, a lot of the Bulkheads from 2008 just stayed in circulation for the next few years, meaning that the only new toy of 2009 was the Bumper Battler Work Zone Bulkhead. This is just a Bulkhead with a slightly brighter green, and he's okay. In 2010, Transformers Animated would be released in Japan, and with it we'd get a ton of Japanese exclusive variants. Starting with the Voyager class Ironhide, this is a Bulkhead with a beautiful chrome green finish. Don't get me wrong, that's not show accurate at all, but it does still look pretty good, and for some reason it kind of reminds me of Christmas. This just feels like a Bulkhead you'd hang on your tree for some reason. There was also the Hard Sound Showdown, which would give you Bulkhead and Soundwave in a 2-pack. Oh god, Takara Tomy Leader Bulkhead looks so good. They gave him a little bit of a paint wash to make the colors a little bit duller, but also make them pop even more. This guy's good. I already have my US Leader Bulkhead. I don't need this guy too, but I mean, if I ever saw him, I couldn't say no. Activator Bulkhead would appear in the Animated Super Collection Volume 2 alongside Bumblebee, Starscream, and Grimlock. Now here's the tricky thing about Bulkhead. You see, most of the time when a character is made for continuity, they stay in that continuity, at least for a bit. Hotshot was stuck in the Unicron trilogy for a long time. Even characters like Windblade or Tarn have a hard time moving on after they're introduced. And yet Bulkhead was immediately pulled from animated and plopped into the very next show, Transformers Prime. Now, for anyone who's curious as to why that is, it actually has to do with his Japanese namesake. Ironhide was supposed to be in Transformers Prime. However, he died in Dark of the Moon, and Hasbro was really worried that kids would get confused about the fact that Ironhide was dead in the movies and yet alive in the show. So they made the decision to change him out for a different character, a familiar character that kids would still like. And that's when they settled on Bulkhead. In some ways, he was kind of lucky to get in here, and yet I'd argue this is what solidified Bulkhead as being one of the true breakout stars of the 2000s. Him and Lockdown were allowed to appear in other continuities very quickly, and as a result, the fans started to truly embrace them. But before we start talking about Prime toys or the Prime show, why don't we pump the brakes right here, right now, and talk about the third-party love Bulkhead has gotten. That's right, Bulkhead's actually had a decent run in third-party. Very few G1 characters can claim that. Hell, a lot of Beast Wars characters still haven't had a single third-party figure, and yet Bulkhead, you're almost spoiled for choice. Starting with the first one I remember, there was the MMC reformatted Bedrock. This Bulkhead is a great remold of their Roadbuster, and I love him. He doesn't really look like any particular Bulkhead. He's definitely not IDW Bulkhead, but the fact that they have a very Prime-ish head and the shoulders, he almost looks how a War for Cybertron Bulkhead might look. It's a great toy, definitely a remold and not the intended use of this body, but still a good one, all things considered. For any fans of Prime, you could get the APC Toys Bulkhead. This is just a luxury knockoff of the first edition Bulkhead, but considering first edition Bulkhead now goes for like $150, this is probably the better direction to go. For any Masterpiece fans, X-Transbots is actually working on an MP-style Bulkhead right now. However, he is still not out quite yet, so we're going to have to wait to see how he turns out. That said, I like him. He looks very similar to Legacy Bulkhead in that they're trying to give him a more G1ified look, but I'd argue that this is actually working a good bit better for no other reason than they remembered his back kibble. Popping down to Legend scale, you could get the New Age Sling Blade. This is supposed to be yet another G1ified Bulkhead, and he is friggin' horrifying. Look at that head sculpt, that is what nightmares are made of. Hell, even Dr. Wu's done a Bulkhead, and this one actually looks the best out of all the G1ified Bulkheads, at least in my opinion. There's just something about his energy, you know? They caught the vibe right. Look, I know that Bulkhead hasn't had a ton of third-party love, but the fact that he's had any, let alone 5 different companies taking a stab at him, that's pretty impressive. Most non-G1 characters don't get anything. Just look at characters from Beast Wars, Armada, Prime, hell, even other characters from Animated. They're all kind of stuck in their own toy lines. Whereas Bulkhead and Lockdown actually have breached the inner fandom. There are so many people who want new takes on specifically those two. They are the breakout stars of Animated, and arguably the breakout stars of Transformers in the 2000s. They officially have entered that same rarefied air of the other evergreen characters. But of course, for Bulkhead, a lot of that love comes from Prime. In Prime, Bulkhead was no longer just a well-meaning space bridge engineer, but instead a veteran wrecker. This guy did some bad shit, and him and his best friend Wheeljack, they know where the bodies are buried. But ever since he got to Earth, he's turned a new leaf on life. He's no longer just about killing Decepticons. Don't get me wrong, he still does that, but he's also wanting to be more like a nice guy, which is why he has a near instant friendship with Miko. And Miko, she pushes Bulkhead to his limits sometimes. Even though I do still like this Bulkhead, I'm just not as big a fan of him. Animated Bulkhead was so fully fleshed out and so unique. This Bulkhead is still really good, but I feel like they lean too much into the idea of big guy screams a lot, or aw man, gentle giant. There's a lot of times where Bulkhead has to play peacemaker between Wheeljack and the other Autobots, and that's always fun to see. But that's not what we see most of the time. Most of the time, Bulkhead is punching people, or he's shrieking like a little girl for the sake of a joke. Still a good character, just not as fully realized as the Bulkhead we had just a few years before.
I am so dumb.
I will also say this. The first edition Voyager Bulkhead is a thing of beauty. The engineering that went into this toy is insane. One of the few toys I would outright say does mass shifting. The Humvee mode doesn't look all that impressive. It's a pretty small vehicle mode, and then Bulkhead transforms, and you have no idea where he hid all of this bulk. I'm not even trying to make the joke there, but yeah, he is bulky and looks amazing. The sculpting is on point, the colors are great, he has his wrecking ball, which is always a good accessory, and then you have the head sculpt. Even though Prime Bulkhead might not be my favorite version of the guy, the design is still really solid, and seeing it here fully realized, it's just a thing of beauty. The only other version of Bulkhead to get this year would have been the McDonald's Shake Bulkhead. This is just a bulkhead popping out from a McDonald's cappuccino, and I think that's pretty cute. There would be so much love for Bulkhead in 2012. Starting off with a guy we've already seen before, there was the Takara Tomy version of the first edition Bulkhead, given a far darker green, which is arguably more show accurate. Truth be told, the true green of the show is somewhere in between the US and Japanese versions. Going down to a smaller scale, there was the Cyberverse Commander Bulkhead. And for a bulkhead that's barely 5 inches tall, I like this guy a ton. His transformation's nice and simple, and even though he isn't as show accurate as the Voyager, it's still really impressive to see how much transformation went into such a tiny guy. I would argue that this really stands out in the first wave of Cyberverse especially. Cyberverse was such an underrated size class for Prime. I would argue that the best toys to come from the series came from that smaller scale, and this Bulkhead, he's hanging with the best of them. Later that same year, you'd be able to get the Battle Tactics Bulkhead, and weirdly enough, Bulkhead looks really good in gray and blue. Who could have guessed? The most show-accurate version of this mold would be included in the Autobot set multi-pack from the Takara Tomy Easy Collection. So let's say you want a Voyager Bulkhead, but you weren't able to get the first edition Bulkhead because for some reason he only showed up in Canada. Well, you could have always gone the Robots in Disguise Bulkhead. This Bulkhead was the one released to mass retail and is usually considered to be the mainline Bulkhead. And overall, he's solid. Really fun, with great proportions. He's nowhere near as show accurate, but I'd argue that he makes for a better Bulkhead. He has a lot more of the character's energy, at least in my eyes. Even though I think his wrecking ball weapon's kinda dumb and way over-engineered, the actual base figure is so nice, and it makes for a good generic Bulkhead. Put him in an IDW shelf. Put him on a Generation shelf. It works. And yeah, it still works for a Prime shelf too. It might not be as show accurate, but as a playable action figure, I'd argue that he's maybe a little bit more fun to mess with. You could also get this toy in Takara Tomy markets, sporting a much lighter green. Personally, I prefer the US edition. To round out 2012, there would be the Bulkhead Happy Meal toy. Just his vehicle mode, but hey, he can shoot out Autobot discs. 2013 would have a ton of oddities for Bulkhead. Starting out small, the animated version of him would appear in the Creon Microchangers line. A very simple Bulkhead, and quite frankly, it doesn't even look like him. That's just Hound with a weird chest. Of course, there was the Beast Hunters Bulkhead, and look at this thing. You should know, the Beast Hunters designs were just the Hasbro toy designers having fun with the vehicle modes and the robots, trying to make them look as Mad Max as possible. And Bulkhead here, he looks like Dovahkiin, man. He looks like he belongs in Skyrim. The vehicle mode especially is just insane with drills, spiked wheels, armor on the front, and then he transforms, and he still looks like Bulkhead. He still has the same familiar energy, but this just feels like a Bulkhead who's on the warpath. For some reason, even though this is supposed to be him hunting dragons, it kind of feels like this is how Bulkhead would have looked when he was doing the real bad shit with the Wreckers. Like the way that him and Wheeljack talk about literally eviscerating Decepticons to make a staircase out of their corpses. I can imagine Bulkhead looking like this a whole lot more than I can imagine him looking like Bulkhead the rest of the time. Normal Bulkhead is friend-shaped. This Bulkhead is a menace. Cyberverse Bulkhead got the same Beast Hunters treatment, and you can see they went even harder on the Viking helmet head sculpt here. We talked about Creo earlier, so now we can talk about ConstructBots, Hasbro's other attempt to rip off LEGO in the 2010s, and here they were able to do Bulkhead with Airraiser and Wolfang, and no, he doesn't look all that good. To bring 2013 to a close, there was the Go Hunter Bulkhead. In Takara Tomy markets, they didn't do Beast Hunters. Instead, they did Transformers Go. They took the Beast Hunters Bulkhead Deluxe and just gave him a more show-accurate green color scheme. I think you've lost the point of this mold, Takara Tomy. It just doesn't look right. It just looks like Bulkhead is wearing a frog mask for some reason. 2014 would be a good year for gimmickry and shot skis. Starting out big, there was the Hero Mashers Bulkhead. This is a non-transforming figure, and the idea of the Hero Mashers is that you could rip them apart and combine them with the other Hero Mashers you had. Marvel, Star Wars, Jurassic World, Transformers, each of them dipped their toes in the Hero Mashers line. And Bulkhead here is pretty solid, a Voyager-sized version of the guy who doesn't have the most paint, but at the very least conveys the character. Kinder would send out a Bulkhead in their Kinder Surprise line. And of course, this was the year of Goldie marketing and their Thrilling 30 line. Prime Bulkhead was both single-packed and released in a 5-pack alongside Optimus Prime, Megatron, Ratchet, and Starscream. 2014 was a good year for Bulkhead, but 2015 was the beginning of the end. After a few years where he was popping up everywhere, he'd only get a single toy this year, a Tiny Titan. Now look at this Tiny Titan, would you? Notice that gun he's holding. It looks like a certain other Gatling gun I've seen in Transformers recently. It looks like Age of Extinction Hound's gun. Look, everyone and their mom have made the same comparisons between Bulkhead and Age of Extinction Hound. Hound is very clearly based off Bulkhead. The incredibly similar builds, the personalities, the fact that Prime Bulkhead is a wrecker and Age of Extinction Hound wrecks shit on the regular. This is so clearly meant to be Bulkhead. So why isn't it? Well, there are 3 prevailing theories. 1. Michael Bay might not have liked the name Bulkhead, and thus he went with Hound instead. 2. There's many people who point out that there's a lot of animated references in Age of Extinction. Lockdown's the main villain. The first scene of the movie is him hunting down and murdering Ratchet, very similar to Lockdown and Ratchet's rivalry in animated. It could have been that Hasbro, who was in the peak of their G1 only era, maybe they just didn't want to give animated that much attention. So they chose to take one of the other animated references, Bulkhead, and change it out for a more G1 friendly name. After all, everyone loves Hound, right? Aren't we all just kids of 1984? But in truth, I think therein lies the rub. The simple fact of the matter was, Hasbro doesn't like to glorify characters that aren't from the core Evergreen cast. It's the same reason why it's rare to see the Beast Wars characters pop up anywhere. It's the reason why it took until Legacy for us to finally start getting characters from the Unicron trilogy, or Prime. The simple fact of the matter was, Hasbro prioritizes the nostalgia of the 80s over everything else. They've had many characters that have become beloved by the entire fandom. Barricade, Lockdown, Bulkhead, Drift, Tarn, Windblade. These are all characters introduced in the 2000s or the 2010s that have made the same strides as their G1 contemporaries. But they get left behind. And for no discernible reason other than just they're not G1. They don't fit in the same aesthetic. We can't put them in the Evergreen style. They're not the cast of 84. And so they get shown the door. In 2016, Bulkhead would only have one release, a reissue of his Creon Microchanger. This would be the last Bulkhead for 6 years. In 2022, Transformers Legacy was announced, and the point of Legacy was to continue where Kingdom left off. Finally, love given to series that weren't just G1. We were told that we would get figures from the Unicron trilogy, from Animated, from Prime, and in Wave 1, Prime RC and Prime Bulkhead. Prime RC and Prime Bulkhead very quickly became despised within the fandom. RC definitely got a lot more of the hate, but for me, Bulkhead was the disgusting one. Looking at him, he's fine. He is the walking embodiment of a C+. He has normal proportions, a normal robot mode, a normal vehicle mode. When he transforms, he looks like Grapple or Inferno. And that's it. The thing that bothers me the most is that Bulkhead's inception as a design, as a character, was supposed to be Derek J. White seeing how far the aesthetic of animated could go, making an outlandish but still cohesive design. A character unlike we'd ever seen in Transformers. Bulkhead is still one of the most beautifully odd and unique of all Transformers. And then you have this guy, and he's nothing. He's just another Autobot. The front of the van becomes his chest, arms come out behind that, legs fold down, head pops up. Even his accessories, the wrecking ball is small, and the gun is made of translucent plastic, meaning that it's very easy to snap off. It's just heartbreaking. Bulkhead, his legacy, isn't being respected in a line literally called Transformers Legacy. Later that same year, there'd be the Prime Universe Bulkhead released in the Wreck-'n' Rule collection. This Bulkhead was given a lot more camo, and if anything, makes him look a lot more like Age of Extinction Hound, at least in vehicle mode. And this is where we leave Bulkhead. 2022, 3 years ago, was the last time he had a toy of any type released in official waters. And that's it. Bulkhead makes me sad. I want you to know that when I was a kid watching Transformers Animated, Bulkhead was one of my favorite characters. I still have a big soft spot for him. I still remember loving him. The first episode of Animated I ever saw was Soundwave's debut episode. I thought that him and Sari were supposed to be the main two characters of the entire show. And all these years later, when I think of Animated, I think of him. I think of the voice, I think of his face, I think of his vehicle mode, I think of his Spotlight episodes. In some ways, Animated is the Bulkhead show. And Animated, so beloved by the fandom, a show that has given so much to the lore, to the history, to the mythos of Transformers. A show that IDW and Prime and so many other series have built themselves off of. Bulkhead and Lockdown were almost like the epitome of the character writing in that show. And they were allowed to blossom. Lockdown and Bulkhead had a few years where they were everywhere. Bulkhead went to Prime, Lockdown was showing up in IDW and Age of Extinction, and it all just stopped. Why did it stop? Why did it ever have to stop? Why were the Transformers from the 2000s considered expendable? Why did we have to focus more on the G1 characters again? Well, a lot of it just comes down to Hasbro. Hasbro prioritizes the 84 cast. Hasbro has for many years now tried to turn the G1 designs into the Evergreen designs, with the idea being cyclical nostalgia. They want it to be a thing where a child growing up in 2025 and a child growing up in 1985 would have the same type of feelings, the same type of nostalgia for the same designs. And it hasn't worked. The focus on G1 has helped poison the franchise, and it's led to Transformers being on a pretty steep decline. I'm not saying that there isn't good stuff in Transformers, far from it. There's still great comics, great toys. And yet, there's no denying, Transformers hasn't been exciting for a while. And the things that do excite people are either Skybound, which is great, but as a comic book is always going to have a very limited appeal in our modern world, or Transformers 1. But Transformers 1 was marooned by Hasbro. No marketing, no real toy line push. Think about this, it's only going to be now, over a year later, that we're getting two of the main characters in toy form, at least proper deluxe form, that being Alita 1 and Arachnid. Even if Transformers was a success, what were the Transformers 1 fans supposed to cling on to? most of their favorite characters didn't even have toys. Bulkhead and Lockdown were the end of a great era in Transformers, a time where reinvention was the focus, a time in which new art styles and new characters and new ideas were allowed to flourish, the end result of the Unicron trilogy, an unbelievably experimental time in Transformers' existence as a brand. And just like so much of that beautiful uniqueness, they were sent to the chopping block. Lockdown and Bulkhead weren't in G1. Barricade wasn't in G1. Blackout and the Beast era and Windblade and Tarn, they're not in G1. Let's put more focus on Ratchet again, or Ironhide again, or Optimus again, or Grimlock again. As a kid, I loved Bulkhead because as I learned more about Transformers, I realized Bulkhead was my character. He appeared in the show that was my first show. It made me excited when Bulkhead and Lockdown got to be in more things, because it was almost like I was rooting for the home team. Bulkhead and Lockdown were something different. And in a series about transforming, different suddenly became something we tried to avoid. But guys, I'll ask you, which was your favorite Bulkhead? And is there a Bulkhead you're trying to track down right now? Alongside that, if you'd like to support me or the show, I'm on Patreon now. For $1, you could get access to my Discord server, Moonbase1. For $5, you could watch videos early or download videos directly from me. Or for $10, you could become a producer. You will be shown in every single video I make from now on, and you'd be able to make direct Patreon requests to me. Bulkhead was a character that's needed an episode for a very long time. In truth, I was holding out hope that he might have some new figure reveal, but that's not happened in the past year. Alongside that, I'm hoping that Red Alert and Trailbreaker will both have episodes within the month, but I can guarantee you that Many Toys of Grimlock will be out by the end of August if everything goes to plan. But until that happens, guys, we're just going to have to see what we get up to next time.